Hello and welcome back. In case you missed our first panel discussion, I would like to reintroduce myself. I'm Debbie Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Insurance Foundation. This panel is Leaders Like Me, Breaking Barriers for Black Men in Insurance. Black males are strikingly absent from the insurance industry. Our panel of industry experts will discuss the possible reasons for this and how we go forward from here. Leading our panel today as moderator is Ericka DeBruce, Vice President of Colleague Experience and Corporate Citizenship at Sedgwick. Our panelists, Larry Phillips, Assistant Vice President, Culture and Inclusion at Gallagher. Herbert Mitchell, Senior Vice President, Client Services at Sedgwick. And Kevin Husbands, Territory Distribution Leader, AIG. Thank you, Ericka, Larry, Kevin, Herbert, for being with us today, for taking part in this very important discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Good afternoon. How is everyone? I'm so excited to be with all of you today, and particularly to be with the three gentlemen who have decided to open their hearts and their expertise and share something that is typically uncomfortable to talk about, which is race. I mean, wouldn't we rather talk about anything else? I tell people that I would rather talk about a stranger's feet than to talk about race. And can we just be honest for just a second? We are all Black on this call. We know it. We're going to have a conversation about it. And notice that we're using the word Black instead of African American because we are trying to be inclusive. We are saying that anyone who looks like me or the three panelists could come from anywhere in the world. And we do not want to be specific to African Americans in particular. These topics are universal to other people who look like us. And so we are going to have that conversation today. What's interesting is that Black people are severely underrepresented in our industry. This particular conference, as well as other topics, have shared about Black underrepresentation. But when you dissect that a little bit further, you will notice that Black men are more underrepresented than even myself and other Black women. And so today we're going to explore that. We're going to talk a little bit about what can we do differently, talk about the challenges that face Black men in this industry, and then learn from these three gentlemen about how we can move forward, particularly from their lens and their experience. So I am going to get started. I want to thank my panelists for being here today and opening your heart and sharing something that we typically do not talk about, but we are going to be brave and talk about it today. So I want to start with my first question, and my first question is for Larry. Larry has been with Gallagher for 8 years, and that happens to be the exact same time he's been with the industry. So I'm very excited to have you, Larry, on. And our first question for you is, how did you hear about our industry? What do you feel is the most common barrier blocking Black men in the insurance industry today?
Well, hi, everyone. First and foremost, it's certainly a privilege and a pleasure to be participating in today's panel discussion. So just want to say thanks again to the D&I Institute for inviting us and putting on yet another great event. As you all know, when most folks in our industry are asked that question, you'll typically get one of two responses. I either fell into the industry or my family has worked in the industry, and so they've always known that it would be a vocation and calling of theirs. So I actually discovered the insurance industry through a college friend of mine whose family just so happens to work for the industry. And during winter break of my sophomore year of college, my friend invited me over to dinner with his family. And during dinner, his parents encouraged me to interview for the Gallagher Summer Internship program. And my immediate response is that I know nothing about insurance, and their reply to me was that that's just the beauty of it, right? And while college graduates are jockeying for position and are trying to find accounting or finance jobs in a very competitive marketplace, insurance is like a hidden gem, right? And then they went on to tell me about how it can be a very lucrative industry. There's no cap on your earnings potential being in sales, and how it can be a very stable industry. They informed me how it was also the lifeblood and oxygen of commerce, and how nothing essentially happens without it. And so I decided to give the internship a shot. And since being an intern for 2 consecutive summers, I've never looked back, and the rest is history, as they say. I'll touch on this later, but I do believe that participating in the internship program has allowed me to open my eyes to the vast amount of career opportunities that the insurance industry presents, and has certainly made my transition into my full-time role much more seamless. But your second question, you touched on the barriers blocking Black males, from the industry. And so as it relates to that question, I don't know if there's one root cause necessarily. I think it's probably more of a culmination of many different factors. However, I do believe that most of the barriers are associated with one overarching issue, which is the lack of exposure about the industry for Black males. So I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which does offer a risk management and insurance degree. But I would also guess that a significant number of attendees that we have listening in to today's call likely didn't go through or likely didn't go to a school that has a risk management and insurance program. And that's simply because there's relatively few colleges and universities that actually offer risk management and insurance courses. Additionally, high schools, most high school students aren't properly informed about career opportunities that the insurance industry presents, and aren't taking insurance related courses either. And so when you compound the lack of awareness and exposure with the negative stigma oftentimes associated with the insurance industry, in terms of it being dull or tedious, or consisting of going door to door selling life insurance policies, or whatever the negative perceptions may be, it leads to issues that our industry currently faces today. And so one of the things that Gallagher does is we host information sessions and conduct classroom presentations for our K through 12 and higher education clients. And so for us, being their broker really goes well beyond supporting their risk management and insurance needs. We aim to be a true extension of their team and assist them with carrying out their mission, which is ultimately providing education and preparing students for the future. And we just have to really think outside of the box and find ways to still make it happen. Taking that extra step to engage our scholastic clients to support their students will not only bring more Black males into the industry, but you'll also be doing yourself a favor by strengthening the client relationships and creating even more stickiness with those client accounts. And so it turns out to be a win-win-win for all parties involved. And as employers, I think we all have the responsibility to teach Black males at an early age about careers in this field, so that they're not only aware of them, but also so that they can do everything that they can as they go through high school, as they go through college, to really position themselves to learn even more about the insurance industry, and then also find internship and career opportunities that pique their interest, which leads me to my second point. So, in addition to the lack of awareness, I would also attribute it to the recruiting practices of employers within our industry. Now, I believe that Black males need more exposure to organizations in our field while they're actually on campus. And they also need exposure to internship opportunities. There's tons of data out there that supports the notion that inclusive and diverse organizations lead to better business outcomes, and how more diverse and inclusive organizations outperform their peers. right? And it also allows organizations to be more innovative. And I think it was according to a Korn Ferry study, organizations are 70% more likely to grow and to expand into new markets. Yet, we're still left, scratching our heads, wondering why the insurance industry is behind when it comes to sourcing Black talent. And you may have seen the headlines about Wells Fargo CEO Charlie Scharf, who relatively recently attributed the bank's lack of diversity to there being a very limited pool of Black talent to recruit from, which, as you can imagine, led to public backlash. While there may be some, organizations within our industry that take that stance or that belief, I don't believe that most insurers or brokerage firms are excluding schools with more diverse representation by design and doing so, intentionally. I think a lot of organizations go to colleges and universities that have, reputable risk management and reputable insurance programs and actuarial and great sales programs, which doesn't always align with or lend itself to going to schools with diverse student populations. And so there's certainly an opportunity to be more intentional with bringing in diverse talent by, I would say, number one, creating a diverse recruiting strategy, even on campuses that you're already recruiting from. And then number two, I would say, is expanding our outreach and identifying historically Black colleges and universities and other schools with Black talent to recruit from. The onus is really on us to go out and cultivate relationships with key personnel and faculty members and with student organizations that align well, with our offerings and what we're seeking from a skill set standpoint. I think far too often organizations will show up to a career fair. They'll sit behind a booth and just hope that the talent miraculously shows up. Now, I think we have to be much more intentional and strategic about identifying Black male students even prior to stepping foot on campus. We should be reaching out to the dean of the business school or career services or professors and ask them, what they think is the best way to, find Black male students on their campuses. Try to work with professors to come in during, one day to talk about careers within our industry. Many of the times that my organization reaches out to key personnel on campus, they'll actually tell us who their rising stars are and who their leaders are, or individuals who possess, the competency and skill sets and traits needed to be successful in the role that we're trying to fill. And so, as I alluded to earlier, it's important that we expand our outreach from schools that we've traditionally recruited from and partner with HBCUs and other schools with considerable, Black representation. I've had the privilege of supporting some of Gallagher's diverse recruiting efforts, and what I've discovered is that while the Howards and the Morehouses of the world, while they may have partnerships with major insurance corporations, most HBCUs aren't connected with insurance employers who recruit from their university, which I believe further perpetuates the lack of awareness and the lack of internship and career opportunities. And I can't stress this enough. I can't stress enough the importance of providing internship opportunities to Black males. They allow us to attract and develop Black males, and furthermore, internships tend to be a major feeder for new employees. And so they increase the likelihood of bringing on a full-time candidate. And the other thing that we should keep in mind is that underpaid internships may be unrealistic for many demographics, particularly Black males. And so it kind of becomes an unintentional way of excluding minorities. So something certainly to keep in mind. And then just lastly, the onus is also on us to get Black males excited about careers within the insurance industry, which is exactly what internships can do. Earlier I talked about there being this negative stigma attached to the industry and how, millennials and students just aren't interested in pursuing careers in the industry. Providing internships to Black males will demonstrate how lucrative it can be, but also how much fun it really is, and how noble, how it's a noble line of work that has true meaning and helps our clients continue their operations and put their lives back together when catastrophes and claims occur. But it really starts with getting Black males excited about the industry. I'll hand it back over to you, Ericka.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Larry, I think that idea around not only the fact that you heard about the industry from people who worked in the industry, and then you having 2 summers as intern, and then taking that and actually that didn't only assist with recruitment, but has assisted so far with retention since you have been with Gallagher ever since. So thank you very much for that. So Herb, I'm going to turn it over to you. My question to you, and thinking about the fact that you have been in the industry for 33 years, and you work with me at Sedgwick for 5 years. We actually came in around the same time. And so my question, Herb, for you is, do you believe that Black men in the industry are provided the same opportunities and exposure as white men? Thinking about what Larry said about this idea around the lack of exposure being a barrier, do you see that just in entry, or do you see that throughout kind of the career path or life cycle of a Black male in our insurance industry?
All right, first and foremost, thank you for that question, Ericka, and certainly it's an honor to be part of this esteemed panelist group today, and for you moderating the session. And it's been a privilege to be in the industry, quite frankly, for 33 years. And kind of similar to what Larry said, I kind of fell into the industry. Really didn't know anything about insurance other than going out and selling an insurance policy. And I think for the most part, not coming from a risk management school, which wasn't we weren't privy to about 33 years ago, that kind of happened. But certainly, in my opinion, no, we are not provided the same opportunities that white men are afforded in the industry. And I think we can all agree that Black men are severely underrepresented in the industry, especially in the executive and management ranks. I believe unconscious bias has played a part in that, and it can be surmised that an individual's implied bias it can be surmised that an individual's implied bias does have a major impact upon that. Of late, you hear a lot of top leaders talk about diversity and inclusion, and they have good meanings by it. But I think what you find happen is all too often it doesn't filter down to the middle management, and you don't see those opportunities afforded to many Black men in the industry. So there's good intentions, but unfortunately, it really doesn't go much further than that. And as you see diversity officers like yourself around the country starting up probably in the last 5-6 years or so, trying to have more opportunities for Black men, people of color. So you're seeing some changes, but it's a slow process. And I think the other part that we're challenged is there's lack of senior level mentors, Black men in our industry that we can look up to. Starting out in this industry 33 years ago, I was fortunate to have a mentor. Didn't look like me, but someone who took a liking to me, felt that I could succeed in the industry, talked to me about a career path that I could have in the insurance industry, and I took that as an opportunity to grow and learn as I walk in the insurance industry. So I think we, as Larry mentioned, need to have more mentors that look like us to be able to afford those that are coming behind us the resources, the time, and to talking to them about the opportunities, which I believe are great in the industry. It's just a slow process. And going back to what Larry said, having the opportunity to engage and recruit at our traditionally, historically Black universities will help in the industry. I think the other thing I would mention also is that for Black men that are coming up through the industry, I don't think we have the same opportunities to make a mistake as white men in the industry. When we make a mistake, unfortunately, it's looked upon us as a whole of the Black man in the industry. We're never given that second opportunity in a lot of cases where you're able to make that mistake and move on. And I think that goes back to the unconscious bias that I mentioned earlier. So those are some of the reasons why, Ericka, I would feel that we are not afforded some of the same opportunities as white men in the industry.
Thank you, Herb. And I would ask, I want to summarize that and then just also ask Larry or Kevin to see if they have any additional thoughts on the question. But Herb, I think one of the things that really resonated with me and your response is it clearly articulates a kind of almost a cycle that happens with Black men. There's not a lot in the industry. Therefore, there's not a lot to look up to and because there's not necessarily someone to mentor and to coach, Black men have a tendency to make a mistake. They're not getting that coaching, mentorship, sponsorship that maybe some other groups are getting. And then that particular mistake has more significance on career and with other Black men who are trying to follow your path. And so I asked the audience to really hear what our panelists are saying, because it doesn't only impact our industry and our ability to get diversity of thought and the best in-class talent, but it also takes a toll on these individuals as a whole. That pressure of having something that significant on your shoulders is a heavy load. So Kevin, Larry, do you, when you're thinking about Herb's question about this idea, do you believe Black men in the industry are provided the same opportunities and exposure as white men? Do you agree, disagree, and how would you like to add? I'm going to start with Kevin and then go to Larry, if I may.
Yeah, so thanks for having us today. Definitely want to thank Business Insurance and the Diversity Institute for putting this panel on. Definitely glad to be here with my esteemed panelists and yourself, Ericka. So much appreciated. But I mean, look, I think it's obvious, right, that the opportunities aren't the same. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this panel discussion to begin with. And there wouldn't be all these conversations taking place over the last several months since, you know, the deaths of George Floyd and countless other individuals that unfortunately we know their names when we really shouldn't, right? But this is where we are. So that was on the social construct of things. And, you know, it really brought a spotlight to the industry and corporate America as a whole as to what's transpiring here. Is there true equality? Is there an equal playing field for the individuals of any race or color? And then also to spotlight the significant disparity that exists for Black men, either trying to enter the industry or who are in the industry but don't last in the industry or don't get the opportunity to grow and develop in their career and progress in the industry. So the obvious answer is no, they don't exist. There's no equality when it comes to you know, progression and opportunity for growth. And Herb made a great point about mistakes. You know, I've been in the industry long enough, 20 plus years, and there's some individuals who, you know, are not of color, and I've seen them do some really, really messed up things in the business and still would always find a landing spot somehow, some way at another company. So, and I don't think that same opportunity would be afforded to someone of color. So, the adage of us having to kind of, cross our T's and dot our I's a little more succinctly is very much the truth. But I think now we're in a moment in time where these conversations are impactful. They develop more awareness, not only to other Black people, but the folks who we would call our allies in this conversation, to really highlight in their minds and the minds of everyone else that there needs to be some changes to really level the playing field, whether that be from a talent pipeline standpoint coming in, or for the existing individuals who are currently in the industry.
Thank you. It's, Larry, with I think we have about 1 to 2 minutes left on this topic. So I wanted to turn it over to you to see if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, sure. So, from my perspective, I believe that not only are Black men not provided, the same opportunities and exposure as our white male counterparts, but I think we sometimes even have to work, twice as hard or be twice as impressive to be granted, those same opportunities. And so, but I would have to agree with Herb and Kevin. I think that the data, right, speaks for itself, and then the demographics of our industry illuminates and supports this notion. We consider the executive and senior leadership teams within our industry, they're obviously overwhelmingly white. When you look at client service representatives or account management roles, they're usually fairly diverse. And so the disparity between the racial makeup of our leaders and then those in client, service roles or other roles really, I think, symbolizes the disproportion between the people who actually have, the power and have the most responsibility, and those that don't. And so we'll see, and we'll start to, we'll know, and we'll start to see signs when we're provided those same, opportunities, that they'll be reflected in a diverse makeup of our senior leadership teams and throughout the rest of the organization.
Larry, I really appreciate that, because, this idea of we'll be able to see it. I mean, we can't hide our skin tone. You can, if you are struggling with the data, or even saying, oh my gosh, are they a representative voice? You can look around, look at your tables, look at your conversations, pay attention to the makeup of the room, and then ask the question, is there representation of Black men? That you don't have to take our word for it. It's not like we're hiding. And so as we transition to the third question, and this is kind of the last official question before we open up to our for Q&A from the audience. This question actually goes to you, Kevin. And Kevin, you said 20 plus years. I'm going to give you all the years so we can get full credit for it. So 24 years. I want to make sure that we get all that credit. And that 24 years at AIG, and that is actually, like Larry, the same amount of time you have been in the industry. And so my question for you, we've talked a little bit about the barriers, not only kind of coming into the industry, how do we learn about it, the barriers that happen as we enter. And then Herb talked about the barriers that exist from opportunities within the industry. Now I'm going to transition to you and ask you kind of what can we do about it? So setting strategic goals and measurable objectives around hiring and promoting practices would help increase the number of Black men in the insurance industry and ensure that experience, equity and growth in the field. What other practices do you think would help increase Black men and other men of color in the industry? Kevin.
So, aside from, telling my full tenure in the industry, I would think that my gray hair and my beard would dictate that it's been significant. But no, it's interesting. So, being at one company for as long as I've been, I've seen it transition through many different cycles of leadership, many different cycles of their perceived value on the D&I space, and the diversity of talent within the organization. And I've seen it ebb and flow. I think luckily we're in a good place right now where we do seem to have the support of a lot of our senior leadership. And, I know within AIG, there are some initiatives that we're looking to establish, as a long-standing platform or pillar for us to kind of vault into the future. A lot of times, I've been part of recent conversations with interns, and a lot of them talk about and ask questions about what's the makeup of our organization from a diversity standpoint. It's important to them, it's critical to them, and oftentimes there's some hesitancy if in fact there's not, from their perception, a diverse organization that they could potentially be walking into. So what that does is that means there's going to be a talent drain, right, if we don't make sure that we set ourselves up, in the case of AIG, for another 100 years, to pull in the right talent. So, I think mentorship programs are important. I know when I first started in the organization, my early years, I saw no individuals of color from a leadership standpoint. And then actually, one of my earlier jobs, there was an individual who's actually also a fellow panelist on one of the other discussions taking place, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Whitehead, who's with Allianz. And, he was in a managerial role when I had just started within that specific office. And, him and I didn't interact a whole lot, but just the visual perception of, okay, this can happen, this can be done, there is someone. Now, the problem is there's not enough of that to go around. And I think establishing, mentorship programs with individuals who are of color. And also, I mean, mentors can be allies as well, too, right? We don't get the opportunities to really sit with someone in a senior position and really pick their brain and be able to really figure out the ins and outs of how the business works, strategic thinking, how to approach a situation, how not to approach a situation, how do you build your network, which is critical in the industry. So all of these things are things that I think would be highly beneficial to younger talent coming in, as well as existing talent within the organization or any organization. So I think we need to do a better job of that. I think, the mentorship part is tough, right? Because it's almost like one of those things where you pull the string and it starts to like unravel, and you start to realize all these other issues that you have. So, mentorship programs are great, but then when you look at the lack of diversity in the potential mentors, it's tough because, in any organization, oftentimes what we see is if 2 or 3 individuals leave at any given time, within a small space of time, it significantly drains the leadership talent because the bench is so small and insignificant that you don't always have somebody ready, willing, and able from a diverse background or that's Black to step into any of those roles. And there often seems to be a lack of awareness from an executive leadership standpoint that if in fact there is a potential individual that may be exiting the organization, or you're looking to restructure the organization in any given way, to have a conversation with that diverse candidate, that Black candidate, to say, look, you do a great job, we don't want to lose you. Can we talk about where we can reposition you in the organization? It just tends to be, we're looking at our P&L and, we're going to spreadsheet this whole situation. And, before you know it, there's a talent drain. And it's sad to say, but a talent drain can be, 3 or 4 individuals exiting the organization. So I think as we talk about mentorship, we have to talk about building a pipeline of talent, not only on the beginning years of your career, but also the folks who exude and exhibit actual potential and talent who are already in the organization. They know the culture, they're aware of the culture, they exude leadership qualities. Why not give them the opportunity to kind of excel in a leadership position? Because that's the only way you're going to build a pipeline. That's the only way you're going to be able to build out those mentors to kind of fill some of those gaps. And then also too, I mean, Larry touched on it a lot, and we need to do a better job of creating awareness within the industry itself. I know I stumbled into the industry. I think most folks probably, if they've been in it longer, I mean, Larry hasn't been in it 10 years, but there was kind of a stumble on his end, right? But most folks 15 years plus that have been in the industry, there's no risk management degree oftentimes. Now, they may have a business degree, or they may have a finance degree or economics, but I've worked for managers who've had horticultural degrees and entomology degrees. And, so the industry is built on talented people, regardless of what their specific business or schooling or educational background is. You want to find the right talent to make sure that we're building a strong structure organizationally. So I think that talent part, the pipeline part, the awareness part, engaging historically Black colleges and universities, that's critical and important. I saw somewhere there was an interview with Ginny Romney, I think, who's the current chairman and CEO of IBM, and she started to talk about we need to, as organizations, think about different ways of bringing in talent. She actually made the comment about maybe you don't have to have a 4-year degree to come and work at an IBM. Maybe, it's a 2-year degree, or maybe you have some kind of vocational skill, or, you've exuded some kind of talent that translates well to the specific industry that, the other individual might be looking to pull you into. And that doesn't diminish or disparage, the importance of having a higher education, because Lord knows I have 2 daughters that just started their freshman year at university, and, they got to get that degree. They got to do it. But that's not always everyone's circumstance, because there are financial considerations that come into play that, might drive where and if an individual is able to go to college or university. So, I think we just really have to start thinking outside the box about how do we pull in and pluck and pick and identify talent across a wide swath, and really pull those individuals in and figure out how to retain those individuals.
Oh, Kevin, there's so much good stuff that you talked about, and I want to give our other panelists an opportunity to respond. There is a saying that I use that's actually on my little bulletin board in my little home office that is called the Leadership Predicament. And the Leadership Predicament basically says the more power you have to create change, the least likely you know what needs to be changed. And so that idea of, awareness and exposure and thinking through who we are considered talented, who's making those decisions, casting a wide net. I mean, those are all things that each one of our audience members can take back and institute immediately. So I want to turn it over to Herb and then Larry regarding the idea around this topic about setting strategic goals and measurable objectives, and what other practices besides those 2 things that we can do or organizations can do to help increase Black men in our insurance industry. Herb?
Sure, thanks, Ericka. I mean, I think to add on to what Kevin said, it's as leaders, as we are Black leaders in our industry, it's important for us to make sure that we are providing mentorship to those who are coming behind us. That's the start. One of the things that resonated with me as Kevin was speaking was 33 years ago in the industry, and even to this day, very often I was the only Black person in a meeting. So when you look around and you ask yourself, is this the right industry for me? it certainly would make someone feel disheartened that this is not someplace that's going to afford me the opportunity because there's no one that looked like me. So one of the things that I started to do early on in my career is to try to provide an ear for anyone, Black men specifically, that were coming in the industry, and kind of talk to them about various opportunities to grow. We've been partners with our diversity and inclusion organization in Sedgwick for the last 5 years, and I was extremely happy that we started that right around the same time we joined. And I think that's going to be critically important as we go forward. And it's not just in the insurance industry, but it's in the corporate world as a whole. So I think that's critically important. And one of the other areas I think as Black leaders is critically important for us to do when we visit, whether it's one of our branch offices or we're sending out communication, it's critically important that you, like with Sedgwick, we have an opportunity to have our picture in our email address. And I think that has a huge impact upon an individual receiving that email and seeing your tag title that you're whatever level within your organization. They can say, wow, that's great. I can be like that individual. I'm going to work hard, et cetera, and do all those types of things. And I have 2 children that are, I wouldn't say children, they're adults that are in the industry. When they got out of college a number of years ago, wasn't many opportunities for them. And I obviously talked to them about the insurance industry and where there's a tremendous opportunity to grow and have a career. Of course, they would say, well, Dad, yeah, that's insurance. I said, well, that pays the bills for us, paid for you guys way through college. And I'm happy to say that they've both been in the industry 10 and 8 years collectively. So I think those are the things that are critically important, that we provide that awareness, the few of us that are in the industry, so that way we can help those that are coming behind us along. And I think that's going to help that statistic as well.
I love that. And I think what's really important is, this might be weird to hear, right? This idea of wanting to see someone that looks like you. If you're questioning that concept, you're very fortunate. You probably never had to look to see if there's someone who looked like you. And I want to just do a really quick kind of awareness point of this idea that in our country and in the United States, there wasn't a lot of women doctors. And there was one thing that radically increased the number of women going into medical school. And it wasn't college fairs or university, trips. It was the show ER. When ER came out, it showed women doctors. And this idea of little girls seeing women doing that role is what increased the number of women in medical school around that time, early 1990s, when we had the biggest jump. And so what these gentlemen are talking about here today is very similar. It's this idea that women would like to see women in senior leadership roles, right? Like this concept isn't foreign, or quite frankly, as Kevin mentioned, it's not unique to just Black men. Our allies and folks who also have similar challenges experience the same thing. So Larry, I'm going to ask you to close us out before we go to Q&A. I want to give us enough time to do Q&A, but you have been our closer for the last 2 times, so I would like you to do the same thing on this topic, please.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Well, so I couldn't, agree with Herb and Kevin anymore. So, the concept of mentorship they both touched on. I grew up in a public housing authority here in Chicago called Cabrini Green. And so I certainly wouldn't have been able to get out of that poverty cycle without education, of course, but also without all the folks that have been so influential in my life, the mentors that I've had. And they both touched on the concept of mentorship. And I also think sponsorship is also very, very important. And oftentimes mentors and sponsors are used interchangeably, but they are 2 distinct roles. A mentor is anyone in any position that has experience that the mentee can learn and benefit from, while a sponsor is typically someone in a senior leadership position within the organization that has a vested interest in helping that protege or mentee, if you will, advance in their career. And I also will say that the mentor may meet with the mentee informally or formally to discuss things in the mentee's personal life. Could be to talk about how to improve certain skill sets or how to advance in their career. While the sponsor is a leader who intentionally and someone who proactively leverages their network and an influence as well to connect a protege with other leaders, to connect them with business opportunities, and to really advocate on their behalf for promotions and pay raises. So, I think the idea of sponsorship as well is vitally important. And I would encourage everyone to seek out a sponsor because we all need as many people advocating for us as possible, and the movers and shakers within the organization are going to be in the C-suite or the the senior leadership team as well.
Thank you. I love the idea of the, helping our audience understand or kind of reiterate the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And from a D&I practitioner point of view, a mentor helps you not feel like you're the only one. They're also the ones that make you not feel crazy, and help you go, nope, that's how that went, and this is what we need to do differently. And a sponsor, to Larry's point, is the person who advocates when you're not in the room. And that is what every single person needs. But the question really is are every single group getting those sponsors and those mentors equitably? And that is where it could have a long-term impact. So as we open up for Q&A, we do have our first question, and it is somewhat similar, but instead of helping other people who are like me, D&I practitioners, leaders, and folks who are committed to diversity and inclusion, which is most likely the reason why they're attending this D&I Institute conference, now we're going to shift to helping students and individuals coming into the industry. So our audience is shifting. So the question that our first audience question is, what advice do you have for students or individuals looking to enter into the industry? And then what should they do to prepare themselves for the D&I culture we're seeing develop in the business? We do have a second question. I want to give them enough time for that second question. So I'm going to just ask two of my panelists to answer, and then we will transition to the next question. So who has a piece of advice for somebody coming into the industry?
I'll jump on that one.
Okay, Kevin.
I think, and it has always worked for me. It's and I think I mentioned it at some point earlier, building your network is critical and important in this industry. You want to make sure you get in at the onset and really have that corporate curiosity, have that industrial curiosity where you're talking to people, you're building your network, you're having conversations, you're being inquisitive. All those things are going to help create a network of individuals who will grow with you as you develop into your career. I remember when I first started, there was a group of us that, we started this young professionals network, and we'd go and do all the happy hours and stuff. Like, we were still like young in our 20s and enjoying life. And, we could hang out with each other until the wee hours of the morning and show up for work like nothing happened, right? Now, we hardly see each other because we're all so further along in our careers and have all these responsibilities from a managerial or an executive standpoint. We have to actually plan our connections. We have to plan to go do lunch. We have to get it on the calendar, get it on the schedule. So my advice is, because at some point you have to utilize these networks in the confines of the business that you're working in to either, help you in any capacity, help you on the business front, help you on the personal front, because you do develop friendships out of some of these relationships as well. So my advice to somebody coming into the industry would be, really don't burn bridges. Try to make sure you build yourself a solid network of the right individuals. Don't be afraid to talk to someone who you feel might be several levels above where you are from a title standpoint, because I think it's impressive to a manager or someone in an executive position to see a younger person have the confidence to approach them and either ask them a question or be curious about something on the business front or the life front, or even like offer some feedback or insight from their own perspective, because we have this thing where we call it reverse mentoring. And a lot of times younger folks coming into the business can teach folks who have been in the industry and in the business for such a long time many a new thing that can be beneficial to help. So that would be my advice to someone coming in. Join an employee resource group. And if your company doesn't have an employee resource group, propose that they develop one and help them develop one, and reach out to your partners in the industry who may have it and get that feedback and advice and insight, so they can be a resource for you. So those are the two things: build your network, and be a part of an employee resource group, because being a part of that ERG can help you develop some of your own leadership skills.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. And the idea of needing to connect and exploring your organization, and what a better time to do that when you're entering in, when you don't know anything, you can actually say, I don't know, instead of waiting 6 years in and then going, hey, I have a question. So that would be, ideal. I'm going to ask Herb this to piggyback onto Kevin, because you said that you have 2 children in this industry. So let me just ask you, what advice did you give them when they entered this industry?
Great. Absolutely. And I just want to add on one thing that Kevin said with regard to that networking. And if you have an interest in the insurance industry, there's many, many professional organizations that you can get involved in right away. One is the Risk and Insurance Management Society, which is a great organization that also has a local chapters as well as national chapters. So if you have an interest, I would recommend that, as well as Claims Management and Litigation Society. There's several. So that's just to add on to the ERGs that Kevin mentioned, that's critically important as you're building your network in this industry. With regard to my kids, I think that I gave them is pretty much the same advice that I've given others that have come along after me in the industry: is pay attention, listen, and act inquisitive and ask questions. You're not going to know everything right away, but if you have the willingness to learn, you will be afforded the opportunity to learn, and it's what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. Don't get discouraged, because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll make a mistake and you may get shot down. But if you stick with it, good things will happen, and it's a good industry for as a career. But that was probably the biggest advice to them, was don't do as I did, do as you do, because there's opportunities for you. I'll get you in the door, but thereafter it's going to be on your work and what you put into it. So I would say that to anyone joining the industry, it's really what you put into it. Yes, it's a little bit more difficult for Black men, no question about it, but I think it is getting better. The message is out with regards to diverse men having the ability to succeed, regardless of whether you have a risk management degree or a horticulture degree. It's all about having the opportunity, and I think that's what I would say. And that's basically the advice I gave to both of my kids, and thankfully they're both in entry-level management now and doing well and making me proud.
Awesome. All right, so let's end with a doozy, like my grandmother would say. Because we have been talking about the barriers. We talked about what can we do differently. We have about 10 minutes left. And so let's ask the question, the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. So we all know that Black Lives Matter has been addressing the systemic and institutional racism in our country, particularly highlighting the inequity in police violence, and in addition to other inequities within our society. Thinking about the fact that all three of your organizations had made a comment or has responded regarding Black Lives Matter, my question to you is, thinking about Black Lives Matter, understanding that that is a society issue, what is one thing that we as an insurance industry can do to leverage, to understand, to better empathize with the Black Lives Matter movement? The one thing we can do within our industry that can move us forward and do our part with the overarching Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm not talking about the political stuff. That ain't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the for real, the reason why the movement exists. So I am going to, Larry, can I start you off? And I'm actually going to try to get to all three of you, and then we will close you out. We have exactly 10 minutes left. So Larry, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'm going to go to Herb, and then Kevin will close us out. Please, Larry.
Appreciate that, Ericka. I can certainly touch on its impact on our community, as well as things that we all should be considering in terms of improving the way things are, the current state of affairs. So, as a Black man, I think the recent civil unrest has made the injustices and inequalities that we see and that we experience on a daily basis to stay top of mind and allow us to be more cognizant of it. I would say, just for me personally, I've gotten so numb to racist and prejudice acts because I would say throughout my childhood and my teenage years, it happened, let's say, often enough that when it did occur, I would just chalk it up to, being a Black man in America, and would just shrug it off and go about my day. However, the civil unrest has now forced me to stop in my tracks when something does occur, to actually make note of it and to actually address it head on. I think the only way that we're going to be able to move forward as a society is if we, if we're agents for change, and in that same breath, it's vital that we speak out when we see injustice occur. And as a Black male within the industry, these issues and wrongdoings will be top of mind, not only for me, but for all of us. And it'll perhaps weigh even more heavily on us than it has in recent history, because we're quote unquote, woke, right, so to speak. And so we just have to be mindful of that. And while we're dealing with all of the issues that we face, we're still responsible for, meeting renewal deadlines, hosting webinars, leading business strategies, and really executing our roles and responsibilities. So, really be sure to take the time to unwind, unpack, and create a network of colleagues and friends and family that you can discuss these matters with, so that you're not, overly stressed and letting it affect your productivity and essentially bringing it all to work with you. So that would be my piece of advice.
Thank you, Larry. Herb?
Yeah, I think, Ericka, having the conversation around Black Lives Matter is extremely important. I think it's to the point of having a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you, for them to kind of understand the challenges as Black men and people of color that we've experienced for 400 some odd years, that knowing that I would have to have a specific conversation with my son regarding, if you get pulled over by a police officer, this is how you have to act, and this is what you need to say. And for getting folks that don't look like us to really understand that that's not a conversation that they need to have with their child and for them to understand why we need to do that. And if we did not have the cameras that we have today, where these civil injustices are happening to the George Floyds, and I can go on, it would be business as usual, because this isn't a new phenomenon. This is something that's always been out there. And it's not about all lives matter or blue lives matter. Yes, those lives matter, but we're trying to educate you on what we have experienced. So I think it's the conversation, as most organizations are trying to have with their colleagues within the confines of their walls. And I know in our organization, we're trying to have those conversations. And it's a struggle, because everyone doesn't understand, because they've never walked in the shoes that we walk in. So it all starts with having a conversation, and an honest conversation really about what Black Lives Matter means. It's not about diluting and all the other things that I think's getting out of the political spectrum of what people associate Black Lives Matter with, because that's really not what we're talking about. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Herb. Kevin?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and not something that can be answered or remedied in 3 or 4 minutes. And as much as you say it's not political, there's a lot of politics involved in a lot of what takes place within, a lot of the institutions across our country. Whether it be corporate institutions or judicial institutions or, law enforcement, like all of these things are tethered together. And, I mentioned earlier, there's no reason why I should know George Floyd's name or Philando Castile's name or Eric Garner's name, or to take even further back, Abner Louimo or Trayvon Martin or Amadou Diallo. Like, there's no reason I should know these people's name, but the way society has forced me to learn their names, and because they were subject to extreme prejudice that led to their deaths or their severe injuries. So there's a lot of work to be done. What can corporations do? I think they can speak out. They can, oftentimes money talks, so they can put their corporate coffers to good use, and assist if they really feel like this is a societal push or shift that needs to happen. They can be engaging to their employee base and make sure that they are listening to the concerns of the people of color within their organizations, Black or Hispanic or otherwise. If there is any level of prejudice, as an organization, they absolutely should support, pushing against that. I think, recently I judged a competition for Southwest Atlanta High School, and obviously predominantly Black kids, but affording the opportunity to engage these young Black kids and show them, like, there are people that look like you that, are in this business, and, just creating more opportunities for people of color, creating more awareness where they know there's a path for them, aside from, problems and issues. And you can, to Larry's point, you can pull yourself out of a situation that may not be ideal. No one wants to be in, a position of destitute, right? So, to be able to have those opportunities, I think organizations just need to be more vocal. I think they need to, adhere more so to what can we do from a financial standpoint to assist? What can we do from a societal standpoint to assist? All of these organizations have community outreach opportunities that they develop and create within their organizations. Be a voice, be a part of the solution, and direct them to where they navigate some of those community outreach opportunities, because a lot of that does go a long way, and oftentimes it may seem minuscule in its infancy as you engage, but it could mean significantly something important to that small Black kid who gets that opportunity. So there's a lot of different moving parts. The answer won't come overnight, but we have to continue to work. We have to continue to drive, and we have to continue to push, the opportunity to stay ever present on these issues, or they can fall by the wayside.
Awesome. I want to thank our panelists, Herb, Larry, Kevin. I am incredibly proud and almost a little, I don't know what the word is, but there is a sense of having a tough conversation in a productive way. And not only did your tools, your resources, your strategies, your suggestions will help our industry, but I also hope that we mirrored or showed, role modeled, what the conversation could look like if you wanted to have that conversation, audience members, within your organization. It is okay to talk about it. It is productive. We are all friends, and we're going to be fine afterwards. So I just want to thank my panelists for being honest, for being authentic, and for giving us an opportunity to hear your worldview, your perspective. I also want to thank D&I Institute, particularly Business Insurance, for allowing us to have this conversation today. Even though there is plenty of other topics that would be more broad, they recognize that this is a topic that needs to be discussed. So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. Thank you. I want to pass it back over to Business Insurance.